I stood before the iron gates of a $4 million estate in Scottsdale, clutching a cheap bag and a ghost of a past life. When the service door opened, my daughter appeared in a maid's uniform, bowing her head as if she did not own the very ground beneath her feet. She did not recognize me, but I saw the tracker on her wrist, disguised as a smartwatch, binding her to this gilded cage. My name is Loretta Vaughan. I am 56 years old, and the last time I walked the streets of Scottsdale, Arizona, I was a woman with a career, a reputation, and a life. Now, 15 years later, I stood on the scorched pavement in a thrift store jacket, staring up at a $4 million fortress that legally belonged to my daughter. I pressed the service buzzer. The sound was a harsh buzz that seemed to vibrate through the heavy iron of the gate. The side door clicked open. Brielle stood there. She looked older than her 32 years, her face gaunt and stripped of the makeup she used to love. She wore a grey uniform that swallowed her thin frame. She did not look at my face. She kept her eyes fixed on the ground, her posture hunched as if she expected a blow. "I apologize for the delay," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I was just finishing the silver." She did not recognize me. My hair was grey now, my skin weathered by years of hard labor in Nevada, and I wore the anonymity of the working class like a shield. I held up a brown package I had fished out of a dumpster behind a courier truck. "Delivery for the kitchen," I said, keeping my voice low and rough. Brielle stepped back to let me in. As she raised her arm to hold the door, the sleeve of her uniform slipped down. A black rubber band was locked around her wrist. It looked like a smartwatch, but I saw the small red light blinking against her skin. It was a proximity tracker. I stepped into the cool air of the mansion. It smelled of lemon polish and expensive lilies. But beneath the luxury, the house felt like a supermax prison. Small black cameras swiveled in every corner of the high ceilings. The interior doors were fitted with biometric fingerprint scanners. A flash of light blinded me for a second. A man stood by the grand staircase, adjusting the lens of a DSLR camera. He was young, with messy hair and eyes that looked too sharp for a simple photographer. This was Cal Mercer. He was supposedly here to shoot interiors for a charity brochure. He walked past me, pretending to check the lighting near the entrance. As he brushed by, he slipped a printed photo into my hand. "Don't look at me," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "Just look at what they do when the guests leave." I glanced down at the photo in my palm. It was grainy, taken from a distance. It showed Brielle on her hands and knees in the dining room, scrubbing the floor next to a table with gold leaf legs. From the parlor, a man's voice drifted out. It was smooth, rich, and dripping with charm. "We are so grateful for the community support," the voice said. "My wife is shy, you know. She prefers the quiet life. Graham Wexler, my son-in-law." I heard a door close, shutting off the guests. The tone of his voice changed instantly. It became cold, sharp steel. "If she drops one more glass, she sleeps in the basement tonight." I felt a cold rage settle in my stomach. I walked down the hallway, pretending to look for the kitchen. On the wall hung a massive family portrait. It was an old photo, one taken before the crash. But something was wrong. The frame was odd. I realized they had cropped the image. I had been standing on the left side. Now, I was gone. It was as if I had never existed. I passed the laundry room, The door to a small supply closet was open. Inside, there was a cot squeezed between a vacuum cleaner and shelves of industrial chemicals. A single, thin blanket lay on the mattress. This was Brielle's room. Across the hall, the double doors to the master suite were open. I saw silk sheets, a massive television, and a vanity table covered in jewelry. That was where Graham and his mother, Elaine, slept. I turned toward the home office. The door was ajar. I slipped inside, my heart pounding against my ribs. In the corner sat a heavy steel safe. It bore the logo of a private asset management firm I had never seen before. But on the mahogany desk, right next to a tumbler of whiskey, lay a thick file. The label was typed in bold black letters. Conservatorship, B. Vaughan. I stared at the words. They had not just stolen her money, they had stolen her personhood. I had stayed away for 15 years to keep her safe from the people who threatened my life, thinking she was living as an heiress. Instead, I had left her to be a prisoner in her own home. 15 years ago, I was not an invisible woman in a thrift store coat. I was the senior compliance manager at Redwood and Lark Capital. I wore tailored suits, drove a German sedan, and believed that the law was a shield that protected the righteous. That belief died the day I found the discrepancies in the Alpha Real Estate Fund. It was not a simple accounting error. It was a massive laundering scheme, washing dirty money through luxury developments. I thought I could fix it. I thought I could report it. Then Dean died. The police report said his brakes failed on Interstate 10. My Dean, the man who checked his tire pressure every single Sunday morning, suddenly lost control of his vehicle on a dry, straight road. I stood by his grave in the rain, holding the hand of my 17-year-old daughter, and I knew it was not an accident. 2 days later, the embezzlement charges appeared. They did not just frame me, they dismantled me. The media feasted on my name. I was the greedy executive who stole from pensioners. They froze our accounts. They threatened to take the house. I remember the man who came to visit me in the holding cell. He did not give his name. He wore a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Plead out," he had said, his voice low and steady. "Disappear. Or Brielle has an accident too. Brakes fail all the time. Loretta?" So I ran. I confessed to crimes I did not commit and fled before sentencing to protect the only thing I had left. I let the world believe I was a monster so my daughter would survive. I died so she could live. For 15 years. I scrubbed toilets in Reno and waited tables in Boise. I became Mary, or Linda, or Susan. I lived in motels that smelled of stale smoke and despair. Every month. I sent $400, sometimes $5, to a Shell scholarship fund I had established before the freeze. It was the only way to touch her life without burning it down. I stayed away because of a letter I received 3 years into my exile. It had no return address, just a single sheet of paper with typed letters. "Don't try to be a hero," it read. "The girl needs a mother who is alive, even if she is nowhere to be found." I had always believed the threat came from the partners at Redwood and Lark. I thought I was hiding from a faceless corporate entity. But standing in that office today, staring at the name on the conservatorship file, the truth hit me with the force of a physical blow. Graham Wexler. The Wexler family were not just the new owners of the fallout. They were the architects. They had not just taken the money, they had taken the girl. They had transferred the asset of my daughter from one ledger to another. I would have stayed hidden forever if not for the package that arrived at my motel room in Tucson 3 days ago. There was no note. Inside was a rusty brass key. It was the key to our old family mailbox, the one I thought was lost in the foreclosure, and beneath it was a photograph. It was not a paparazzi shot. It was taken from inside the house, from a high angle, likely a security feed. It showed Brielle in that grey uniform, her head bowed, weeping, while a hand pointed a finger in her face. The fear that had paralyzed me for 15 years evaporated. It was replaced by a cold, hard clarity. They had broken their side of the deal. They promised she would be safe if I stayed dead. They lied. I looked at the file on the desk one last time before slipping out of the office. I stayed silent for 15 years to keep my child safe. I whispered to the empty room, my voice shaking with a rage I had suppressed for too long. But if that safety is just a different kind of chain, then I am coming back to cut it. I cornered the photographer near the service entrance. He was changing lenses, his hands moving with the practiced speed of a professional. But his eyes were scanning the hallway rather than his equipment. He looked too alert for a man hired to photograph upholstery. "You are not here to take pictures of the drapes," I said, keeping my voice flat and pressing my back against the wall to stay out of the camera sightlines. Cal froze. He did not jump. He turned slowly, assessing me with a cold, calculating gaze. "And you are not a delivery driver," he replied, his voice a low murmur. "You walk like someone who is afraid of leaving footprints." "Who are you?" I asked. "I am writing a story," Cal whispered, leaning in closer so his lips barely moved. "Not the fluff piece they paid for. I am building a file. This mansion. It is not hers. It is owned by a limited liability company registered in Delaware. Your daughter owns nothing. The paper trail says she is under a total financial conservatorship. Graham and Elaine are her legal guardians. They control every cent she spends and every breath she takes." The confirmation hit me hard, but I pushed the emotion down. I needed to see her. I found Brielle in the cavernous kitchen. She was chopping vegetables with mechanical precision, her eyes vacant. The kitchen was empty for a brief moment. I walked past her, grabbing a rag to wipe a spotless counter. "The brave little toaster never gives up," I murmured. It was a silly phrase from a children's book we had read 1,000 times when she was 6. It was our code for when the world felt too big and scary. Brielle stopped. The knife hovered over a carrot. Her shoulders stiffened, and for a second, the mask of the servant slipped. She turned her head slowly, her eyes wide and rimmed with red. "Please don't," she breathed, her voice trembling. "They can hear. The vents—" She quickly returned to chopping, her hands shaking violently. I retreated to the pantry, my heart hammering. On a clipboard hanging by the freezer, I saw the staff schedule. At the bottom, in bold red text, was a reminder, per Harridan and Sloan agreement. Any disclosure results in immediate termination and litigation for breach of contract. They had terrified the help into silence with the threat of bankruptcy. From the shadows of the hallway, I watched Elaine holding court in the parlor. She held a glass of champagne, speaking to a local councilman with a tragic expression. "It is such a heavy burden," she sighed, performing the role of the martyr. "Brielle struggles so much with her mental health. We built this foundation to help others like her." In the kitchen, the reality was far less noble. Graham walked in, not with love, but with a small plastic cup. "Time for your vitamins," he said. His voice was casual, but his body blocked the exit. I raised my phone, hiding it behind a stack of plates, and zoomed in. I captured the label on the bottle he left on the counter for a split second. I recognized the names: benzodiazepines and a high-dose antihistamine. The dosage was not lethal, but it was enough to keep her foggy, slow, and compliant. It was enough to make her look incapacitated to a judge. I met Cal by the back gate as he was packing his gear. The sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows across the lawn. "You have a choice," he said, slinging his bag over his shoulder. "Walk away and stay a ghost, or help me burn them down. But know this: they fight dirty. They will find your pressure points." I did not answer him then. I drove back to my motel in silence. The neon sign buzzed outside my window, flickering in the twilight. I opened my battered suitcase and dug into the lining. I pulled out a silver USB drive, scuffed and old. It was the backup I had made the night before I was arrested 15 years ago. I plugged it into my cheap laptop. The file directory loaded slowly, ancient data blinking onto the screen. There were hundreds of documents about the money laundering scheme at Redwood and Lark. But one folder caught my eye. It was a file I had copied from the server logs without thinking, just grabbing everything I could. The file name was simple: Wexler. The connection was not new. It was 15 years old. I traded my delivery uniform for a stiff blue polo shirt and a clipboard. For the past 3 days, I had been the independent security auditor hired by the estate management firm. It was a bold lie, but Graham was too arrogant to verify the credentials of someone he considered a servant. I walked the perimeter of the property, not to check the locks, but to learn the rhythm of the cage. The camera in the east hallway had a 4-second reset delay. The night shift guards took a smoke break at exactly 2 a.m. I found Brielle in the laundry room, folding towels with hands that were raw from bleach. I stood in the doorway, pretending to inspect the motion sensor. "The blind spot is by the pool house," I whispered without looking at her. "If you ever need to run—" Brielle did not stop folding. She smoothed a white towel with terrifying precision. "You came back," she breathed, her voice barely a ghost of a sound. "They will. They will kill you, Mom." I looked at her sharply. I expected to see terror in her eyes. Instead, beneath the haze of the medication, I saw the sharp, calculating look of a trapped animal waiting for the hunter to blink. She was not just surviving, she was recording. A bell chimed from the living room. It was showtime. I followed the noise to the grand salon. Graham had set up a ring light and a smartphone on a tripod. He was live streaming to his followers. He sat on the velvet sofa, pulling Brielle down next to him. His smile was dazzling, a perfect mask of empathy. "We take it one day at a time," Graham said to the camera, his voice thick with rehearsed emotion. He squeezed Brielle's shoulder, his fingers digging into her flesh. "My wife fights her battles every single day. She is my brave girl." The moment the red light on the phone went dark, he pushed her away as if she were contagious. He stood up and checked the viewer count. "Smile less next time," he snapped, his voice dropping to that cold, metallic tone. "You looked manic." "I am tired, Graham," Brielle said softly. He turned on her, his face inches from hers. "You do not get to be tired. You belong to this brand, Brielle. Just like the logo on this shirt. You exist because I market you." I stepped forward, my clipboard clutched to my chest like a shield. "Mrs. Wexler looks pale," I said, interjecting with my best professional voice. Perhaps a medical check is in order. I can drive her to the clinic. Elaine appeared from the shadows of the hallway. She moved silently, like a viper in silk. "That will not be necessary," she said, her voice icy. "We have full legal guardianship. If anyone attempts to remove Brielle from this property without our consent, we will file immediate kidnapping charges. Do finish your audit and leave." I retreated to the study, my blood boiling. I needed to know the depth of their control. I used the code I had seen Graham punch in earlier to open the wall safe. Inside, beneath the tracking device logs, was a document I recognized. It was Dean's will, but it had been altered. The original document left everything to Brielle unconditionally. This version, dated 2 weeks after his death, listed her as a conditional beneficiary. The executor had full discretion to withhold funds if the beneficiary showed signs of instability. The executor was Elaine Wexler. They had rewritten his legacy to enslave his daughter. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from Cal. "They know who you are. Get out." My heart hammered against my ribs. I turned to leave, but my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. "Who is this?" I asked. "I am the only other person in this family who wants to see Graham burn." An elderly female voice rasped on the other end. It was weak, but laced with venom. "I have a recording, Loretta, but you have to trust me." The meeting place was a small Catholic church on the edge of the desert, where the shadows stretched long and thin across the pews. I sat in the back row, my hands clenched in my lap. A woman slid into the pew behind me. She smelled of mothballs and expensive perfume that had turned sour. "Do not turn around," the voice rasped. It was Marlene Wexler. She was Graham's aunt, the family matriarch who had been quietly erased from the board when Graham took the throne. "Why are you helping me?" I asked, staring at the crucifix ahead. "Because my nephew is a parasite." Marlene spat, her voice trembling with a mix of age and fury. "He and his mother cut me out of the trust. They think I am senile. They think I do not hear what they say when they think they are alone." A cold, heavy object dropped into my hand. It was a USB drive. "You have the recording?" I asked. "I have everything," she whispered. Graham did not build this cage alone. He had help. Dr. Eris and that snake of a lawyer, Mr. Sterling. They signed the competency papers without even examining the girl. They declared her invalid so they could validate their own paychecks. I drove back to the motel and plugged the drive into my laptop. Cal sat on the edge of the bed, his face grim. We clicked on the audio file dated 2 weeks ago. Elaine's voice filled the room, clear and chilling. "The asset is becoming unstable. Graham. If she makes a scene at the gala, the donors will panic. I will handle it." Graham's voice replied, dismissive and arrogant. "I will double the dosage before the event. By the time she steps on stage, she will be too sedated to speak, let alone rebel. We just need her to smile and wave." The asset. Not my daughter. Not a person. An asset. I felt sick, but Cal pointed to a folder of photos I had taken of the kitchen clipboard earlier. "Look at this," he said, tapping the screen. "The chore list." I looked closer. What about it? It is just cleaning duties. "No," Cal said, his eyes narrowing. "Look at the dates. Every time she writes scrub baseboards, there is a corresponding withdrawal from the medical account for emergency intervention. And here, Polish silver, Matches the date she was forced to sign over her trust fund interest. I realized then what I was looking at. It was not a schedule. It was a diary written in the only code she could get away with. Brielle had not broken. She was documenting her torture right under their noses. She tried to fight them before, I said, the realization landing like a stone in my gut. That is why she stopped. Every time she rebelled, they called it a panic attack. They hospitalized her, drugged her until she drooled, and used the medical records to prove she needed a conservatorship. They weaponized her resistance. We cannot just pull her out, Cal said, pacing the small room. If we grab her, they call the police. They have the legal paper. They will say you are a kidnapper and she is off her meds. We lose. We do not steal her, I said, my voice hardening. We break the lock. We attack the conservatorship. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I had found in an old legal directory. It belonged to Tessa Grady, a shark of an attorney at Grady & Klein Advocates in Phoenix. She was known for tearing apart abusive guardianships. Tessa agreed to meet us at a diner off the highway an hour later. She was a sharp woman in a red blazer who listened to our story without blinking. When she heard the audio recording, she did not look shocked. She looked hungry. "We have enough to start a war," Tessa said, stirring her black coffee. "But filing a motion is not enough. Judges are slow, and the Wexlers have deep pockets. They will bury this in sealed hearings for 10 years. So what do we do?" I asked. Tessa leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine. "We need to force their hand. We cannot just win in court. We have to win in the court of public opinion before the judge even bangs the gavel. We need a moment where they cannot hide behind a seal, a public explosion." "The gala," I said. "Exactly." Tessa nodded. "If you want to save her, you cannot just be a mother. You have to be a demolition expert, and you have to be ready to blow the whole thing up while she is still inside." I opened the door to room 204, and the smell of violation hit me before the sight did. My mattress was slashed open, spilling foam guts onto the dirty carpet. My clothes were scattered across the parking lot outside, shredded into rags. My laptop was gone. Graham was not hiding in the shadows anymore. This was a direct message. He knew I was here, and he wanted me to know that he could touch me whenever he wanted. I sat in the dark for 12 hours waiting for Cal. When he finally knocked, he looked like he had gone 10 rounds with a cement wall. His lip was split and purple. He held his ribs as he limped into the room. "Routine traffic stop," Cal said, spitting blood into the sink. "They held me for 6 hours. They confiscated my memory cards for evidence review. They are stripping us naked. Loretta, they want us to run." The rage that had been simmering in my gut for 15 years boiled over. I grabbed my car keys. "I am going over there," I said, my hand shaking as I reached for the door handle. "I am going to kill him." My phone rang. It was Tessa. "Stop!" Tessa shouted, her voice cutting through the speaker like a whip. "That is exactly what they want. They want you to break down the door so they can shoot you for trespassing or lock you up for insanity. If you go there tonight, you lose. You need to be cold." I forced myself to drop the keys. Tessa was right. I needed to find the weak link. The next morning, I cornered Dr. Eris in the parking garage of his private clinic. He was the psychiatrist who had signed the competency papers. He was a small man in a suit that cost more than my car. I blocked his door before he could get in. "I signed what was clinically appropriate," he stammered, clutching his briefcase against his chest. "Did you?" I asked, stepping closer, Or did you sign what Graham paid you to sign? Does the name Redwood and Lark mean anything to you? Doctor. His face went white. The colour drained from his skin so fast he looked like a corpse. That name was a ghost he thought was buried deep. He scrambled into his car and sped off without another word, his tyres screeching on the concrete. He was terrified. That confirmed everything. I met Tessa later to review the subpoenaed medical file. My stomach churned as I read the summary. Patient suffers from delusions and unreliable memory due to severe abandonment trauma caused by maternal desertion. They had used my disappearance against her. The reason I left was to save her life, but they had twisted it into the weapon that destroyed her mind. They convinced the court that her memories of abuse were just hallucinations of a broken girl who missed her mommy. Then came the courier. A heavy cream envelope arrived at Tessa's office. It was addressed to me. Inside was an invitation to the Wexler Charity Gala. There was a handwritten note from Elaine. Join us. Let us heal the past together. It was a trap, a beautiful, public trap. They wanted me to come. They wanted to drag the criminal mother onto the stage. Let me scream and look crazy, and then use me as a prop to show the world how much they had saved Brielle from my bad influence. I managed to get close to the mansion one last time before my security cover was blown. I watched the delivery entrance. Brielle came out to sign for a floral arrangement. She looked exhausted. She saw me. She did not wave. She walked past the gate and dropped a crumpled receipt on the ground before turning back to the house. I waited until the coast was clear and picked it up. On the back, in hurried scrawl, were 2 lines. Gala equals endgame. If you want to strike, strike there. I watched her through the gap in the fence as she walked back inside. She passed a hallway mirror. She stopped. For the first time since I returned, she did not hunch her shoulders. She stood up straight. She looked at her own reflection, her eyes hard and dry. She whispered something to the glass, and I read her lips perfectly. I knew you would come back. I have been preparing. Tessa Grady slapped the file onto her desk with a sound like a gunshot. The fluorescent lights of her office hummed over the spread of financial documents that painted a picture of absolute greed. It is a washing machine, Tessa said, pointing a manicured finger at the flowchart. The mansion was not purchased with your husband's insurance money. It was bought by the Wexler Family Hope Foundation. Elaine moves dirty money from commercial real estate bribes into the charity, buys assets like the house, and claims it is for the public good. Brielle is just the tenant they use to get the tax write-off. It was sterile. It was evil. And it made me remember the USB drive I had kept for 15 years. I plugged it in and found the old voicemail from Dean. I had listened to it 1,000 times, crying over his voice, but I had never really heard the words until now. Loretta, honey. Dean's voice crackled through the speakers. I am scared. This new investor. Wexler. He says if I do not sign the deal, the brakes might fall off more than just the project. The room went silent. It was not a figure of speech. Cal burst into the office, his face pale. He was holding a leaked schedule for the gala. It is not a fundraiser, Cal said, throwing the paper down. It is a coronation. Graham is going to announce that Brielle is voluntarily stepping down from the board of her own trust due to her fragile condition. She is going to be rebranded as the face of the foundation, a mascot. She trades her ownership for a monthly allowance. I felt the bile rise in my throat. I went to see Marlene one last time. We met in her car this time. She looked smaller, frailer. Why do you let Elaine control you? I asked. Marlene gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles turned white. Because of the accident in '98, Marlene whispered. I hit a pedestrian. I was drunk. Elaine made it go away. She knows where the body is. Loretta. She fixes things, just like she fixed your husband. The pieces slammed together. Dean did not have an accident. He was murdered because he refused to let Wexler use his firm to launder money, and now they were doing the same thing to his daughter. We need an emergency injunction, Tessa said when I called her. But the judge will not sign it unless we prove Brielle is competent. If she is on those meds at the gala, we lose. We had to take the risk. Through a nurse Tessa trusted who had access to the house. We managed to switch Brielle's pills for sugar placebos. For 48 hours, my daughter went through withdrawal. She sweated. She shook. She vomited until there was nothing left, but she cleared. On the night of the gala, 2 hours before the doors opened, the nurse facilitated a video call. Brielle sat in front of her vanity. She looked pale, but her eyes were sharp. They were Dean's eyes. Brielle? I said, my voice choking. I am coming to get you. I will get you out. Brielle leaned into the camera. She did not look like a victim anymore. She looked like a woman who had just woken up from a 10-year coma. Mom, she said, her voice steady and low. I don't need you to save me. I need you to stand next to me when I burn this cage. The plan was a 3-pronged spear aimed directly at the heart of the Wexler Empire. We synchronized our watches in the parking lot like soldiers preparing for a raid. Tessa was at the courthouse to file the emergency injunction exactly 1 minute after the gala began. Cal was rigging the ballroom with a localized network to hijack the live stream. And I was the bait. I would walk into that room and let them humiliate me so Graham would get arrogant enough to slip. We need one more set of eyes, Cal said, checking the battery on his backup camera. I cannot man the stream and shoot the floor at the same time. A black sedan pulled up next to us. The window rolled down to reveal a face I had not seen in 15 years. Jordan Pike. He used to be the head accountant at Redwood and Lark. He had gone to prison for 2 years for the same crimes I was framed for. He looked older, harder, and ready for blood. I am not here for the open bar, Jordan said, stepping out and adjusting a hidden earpiece. I am here to balance the ledger. Jordan looked at Cal, then at me. He hesitated before speaking. You should know who you are working with. Loretta. Cal is not just a journalist. Dean Vaughn was not faithful in his 20s. Cal is his son. The world seemed to stop spinning for a second. I looked at Cal. I searched his face and saw it clearly now. He had Dean's jawline. He had Dean's way of holding his shoulders when he was stressed. He was Brielle's half-brother. I didn't know how to tell you, Cal stammered, his voice breaking. I came to find him years ago, but he was already dead. I just wanted to help my sister. We do not have time for this, I said, my voice thick with emotion I had to swallow. I reached out and squeezed Cal's arm. We will talk later. Right now. We have a family to save. I entered the ballroom. The air smelled of expensive perfume and hypocrisy. Elaine Wexler spotted me instantly. She smiled, a predatory baring of teeth, and waved me over to the VIP table. I am so glad you decided to be sensible, Elaine purred. handing a leather folder to a pale, silent Brielle. "Here is your speech, darling. Read it exactly as written. Do not improvise. We want everyone to know how grateful you are that Graham saved you from your genetic destiny." I glanced at the script. It was disgusting. It was a public admission of insanity and a thank you note to her captors. Brielle took the folder. Her hands did not shake. She looked at me, and I gave a nearly imperceptible nod. "Ladies and gentlemen," Graham announced from the stage, his voice booming with charisma, "please welcome the heart of our foundation, my wife, Brielle." Graham offered his hand to help her up the stairs, acting the part of the doting saviour. Brielle took it, stepped up to the podium, and adjusted the microphone. The room went silent. Hundreds of wealthy donors waited to hear the broken heiress apologize for her existence. Graham stood just behind her, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. He was smiling at the crowd. He felt safe. He felt in control. Brielle opened the folder. She looked at the script. Then she closed the folder and placed it on the podium. She looked up, her eyes clear and burning with a fire they had tried to extinguish with pills and fear. "I want to thank..." Brielle started, her voice ringing out clear and strong. "I want to thank the people who taught me how to pretend to be weak." A ripple of confusion went through the crowd. Graham's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, his hand tightening on her back. He had no idea that Jordan had rerouted the stage microphones to an independent server. He had no idea that Tessa was currently mirroring Elaine's phone screen to a massive projector intended for the donor thank you slide. He thought he was the director of this play. He did not realize he was the villain in the final act. Graham moved with the speed of a viper striking at a mouse. He maintained his dazzling smile, but his eyes were dead sharks as he reached for the microphone. He tried to wrap his arm around Brielle's waist, to force her into a picture-perfect embrace, a visual lock that screamed, "Happy family." "My wife is overwhelmed." Graham laughed smoothly into the mic, his fingers digging into her ribs. "She gets so emotional about our work." Brielle did not struggle. She simply shifted her weight and stepped to the side. It was a small movement, but under the spotlight, it looked like a chasm opening up between them. Graham grabbed at empty air. The audience fell into a confused hush. I stepped out from the shadows of the stage wing. I did not look like a servant anymore. I stood in the center of the light, wearing my cheap suit like armor. 15 years ago, I disappeared, I said, my voice projecting without a microphone, raw and loud enough to reach the back tables. I did not leave because I stopped loving my daughter. I left because I was told she would die if I stayed. So I have a question for every donor in this room. Ask yourselves, who got rich when I went to prison? Elaine Wexler stood up from her table. She looked regal and terrified. "Security," she barked, pointing a diamond-clad finger at me. "Remove this woman. She is a convicted felon. She is mentally unstable and dangerous." The crowd began to murmur. The label felon was a powerful weapon in a room full of old money. It was exactly what Elaine wanted. She was turning me into the villain. Then the massive projection screen behind the stage flickered. The thank you donors slide vanished. In its place, a document appeared. It was high resolution and undeniable. It was a prescription log for heavy sedatives prescribed by Dr. Eris. Next to it was a schematic of a proximity tracker, and below that, A bank transfer record showing $2 million moving from the Wexler Hope Foundation to an anonymous shell company that purchased the mansion. A ripple of shock went through the room. At the back of the hall, Cal hit the go button. Every phone in the room buzzed simultaneously. A notification popped up on 300 screens. Live the truth about the Wexler charity gala. Graham abandoned the facade. He grabbed Brielle by the wrist, his grip bruising, and dragged her toward the heavy velvet curtains backstage. "You stupid girl," he hissed, his voice low and vibrating with fury. "You have no idea what you are doing. You are destroying your own safety net." Brielle planted her feet. She looked him in the eye, and for the first time, she did not blink. "No, Graham," she said, her voice calm and terrifyingly steady. "You are the one who does not understand. I learned how to count money just like you do." Security guards in black suits rushed toward me, ready to drag me off the floor. I braced myself for the impact, but a small figure stepped in front of me. It was Marlene. She held up a folded piece of paper, stamped with the seal of the Arizona Superior Court. "Back off," Marlene growled, waving the temporary injunction in the face of the head guard. "Unless you want to be named as accessories to a federal kidnapping charge, you will not touch her." The guards hesitated. The order was not official yet, but Marlene's confidence froze them. On the stage, Elaine was frantically tapping on her phone. She was trying to text her PR team, trying to delete files, trying to stop the bleeding. She thought she was safe behind her screen. She did not know that Tessa was mirroring her display directly to the main projector. The entire room gasped. On the giant screen, looming over the frozen crowd, a text message bubble appeared. It was sent 30 seconds ago from Elaine's phone to Dr. Aris. The message was simple and damning. "Increase the dose tonight. I need her to be quiet before she ruins everything." The double doors of the ballroom flew open with a force that silenced the orchestra. It was not a surprise guest. It was a squad of uniformed officers and a court official holding a thick stack of documents. "Graham and Elaine Wexler," the official shouted, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. "By emergency order of the Superior Court, the conservatorship of Brielle Vaughn is immediately suspended, pending a federal investigation. Medical personnel are here to conduct an independent evaluation right now." The room erupted into chaos. Graham turned to run toward the service exit, his face slick with sweat. He barely made it 5 steps before his phone began to scream with alerts. He stopped, staring at the screen in horror. The transfer he had forced Brielle to sign moments ago had triggered a flag. Jordan Pike stepped forward from the tech booth, holding up a tablet for the police to see. "The bank just froze the assets," Jordan announced, his voice grim. "That transfer was not a donation. It was structured exactly like the payments made to the shell company that killed Dean Vaughn." The air left the room. The twist hit the crowd like a physical blow. Jordan played the audio file from the old ledger. Dean's voice filled the hall, terrified and clear, detailing the threats from a man named Wexler. It was no longer a tragic car accident. It was a cold case homicide, and the motive was standing right there in a tuxedo. Elaine turned on Brielle, her mask of civility shattering completely. "You ungrateful little brat," Elaine screamed, lunging forward before a guard held her back. "We took you in. We raised you when your mother abandoned you." Brielle did not flinch. She stepped closer to the woman who had been her jailer. "You did not raise me," Brielle said, her voice ice cold. You only raised my signature. The police moved in to handcuff Graham. He looked at me, his eyes begging for some kind of mercy or negotiation. I walked up to him. I did not scream. I did not strike him. I simply reached into my pocket and pulled out the black rubber tracking band I had cut off Brielle's wrist earlier. I placed it gently on the table in front of him. You made her a servant in her own house, I said softly. Now, you will be a servant of the law. As they dragged Graham and Elaine away, Cal stepped out from behind the camera equipment. He walked toward Brielle, looking unsure for the first time. I am not here for the story, Cal said, his voice trembling slightly. I came because I owe you a family member who actually stays. Brielle looked at him, then at me, processing the resemblance. She did not hug him, but she gave a slow, firm nod. Her eyes were no longer the lonely eyes of an orphan. The lawyers set up a table right in the center of the ballroom, under the flashing lights of the police evidence cameras. Brielle signed the documents. She formally revoked the power of attorney. She signed the restraining orders. She authorized the seizure of every hard drive in the mansion. When the ink was dry, the room began to clear. It was just the two of us left in the debris of the gala. Brielle turned to me. She looked tired, but she stood tall. Mom, she whispered, asking the question that had haunted us both for 15 years. Did you really leave me? I looked at her, my heart breaking all over again. I could have blamed the threats. I could have blamed the fear, but I owed her the truth. I was forced to disappear so you would survive, I said, tears streaming down my face. But I should have found another way. I should have fought harder. I am so sorry. Brielle looked at me for a long moment. Then she reached out and took my hand. We are here now, she said. We walked to the massive front doors of the mansion. The press was waiting outside, their cameras flashing in the night. Brielle pushed the doors open with her own hands. She stepped out onto the porch, not as a maid, and not as a victim. She stood as the owner of the estate. She looked directly into the lens of the nearest camera. I am not their story anymore, Brielle said, her voice ringing out into the night. I am the writer of the ending. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below to share your thoughts and connect with others. Don't forget to subscribe to Nora Revenge Stories, like the video, and hit that hype button to help this story get heard by even more people.